In the luxurious beachside villas of California, where golden sunlight danced across sparkling swimming pools and expensive cars gleamed in the driveways, the Thompson family was always admired by neighbors as the picture of perfection. Yet beneath that polished exterior lay deep, hidden cracks. Richard Thompson, a successful 58-year-old businessman, woke up on the morning of August 20, 2023, with a vague sense of unease. He walked downstairs, picked up his phone to check bank notifications, and his heart seemed to stop. His personal credit card had been used heavily throughout the night. Over $100,000 had vanished in just a few hours. Lavish charges from high-end fashion stores, upscale restaurants, and even a large transfer to an unknown account. Richard sank into the leather sofa, his hands trembling as he scrolled through the transaction list. He knew exactly who was responsible. Only one person in the house knew the password to that card. It was Jake, his 27-year-old son. Jake Thompson, a tall young man with a charming smile and a carefree lifestyle, had returned to his parents' home after his small business ran into trouble. On the surface, he was still the son Richard, and his wife Emily had always been proud of. But behind the family dinners filled with forced smiles, Jake had secretly nurtured greed and resentment. He envied his father's success, the large house, and the thick bank accounts. The night before, while his parents went to bed early, Jake had slipped into the home office, taken the credit card from Richard's wallet, and spent freely. He shopped, booked travel, and even transferred a large sum to friends, hoping to repay it quickly before anyone noticed. But that morning, as Richard stared at his phone screen, it was already too late. Stories of betrayal within families are not uncommon. There are children who steal from their own parents, siblings who fight over inheritance until blood ties shatter, and dark secrets exposed that plunge entire households into chaos. Revenge Scars is the channel that tells these cold, calculated revenge journeys inside American families, where trust is exploited and greed turns people into monsters. Here we witness not only the pain but also how victims rise and make betrayers pay a heavy price. Today, we follow the story of Richard Thompson, the father betrayed by his own son through the theft and reckless spending of his credit card, and the very next morning, he made Jake lose $2 million. Have you ever wondered, when your own flesh and blood stabs you in the back, whether you should forgive or let justice be served in your own way? Stay with us until the end of this video to witness the entire dramatic and intense revenge journey. And if you have ever experienced betrayal from family, leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about greed within blood relations? What kind of American-style family revenge stories would you like to see next on Revenge Scars? Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the deepest revenge scars from those we once trusted most. Richard stood up and walked slowly to the balcony overlooking the pool. The sea breeze carried a salty tang across his face. He remembered the years of hard work building his career from nothing. He had sacrificed so much time for his family, for Jake since the boy was a mischievous child. Emily, his wife, often said Jake inherited his father's ambition, but that ambition had now become a sharp knife driven into Richard's back. He did not shout. He did not storm into Jake's room to confront him. Instead, he sat quietly, his tired eyes gazing into the distance. Inside him, a storm was forming, a storm of betrayal and the intent for revenge. Jake was still sound asleep in his large room on the second floor. He dreamed of coming money and a luxurious life he believed he deserved. He had no idea his father had discovered everything, no idea that from this moment, his fate had begun to shift in a direction he could not foresee. Richard sighed, his hand gripping the balcony railing tightly. He knew exactly what he had to do, not an argument or throwing his son out of the house. That would be too easy. He wanted Jake to feel similar pain, perhaps even deeper. He wanted his son to lose everything his greed had made him dream of. And so, in that quiet villa, the revenge journey began silently, but with meticulous calculation. Richard was not in a hurry. He understood that revenge within a family required patience and intelligence. He understood that mental scars would hurt far more than any financial loss. Suddenly, he recalled words from an old friend. In American families, money can be rebuilt, but once trust is destroyed, it is almost impossible to repair. Richard smiled coldly. He would not let Jake escape this time so easily. The next morning, in just a few short hours, he would make his son lose $2 million, and that story would become a harsh lesson about the consequences of betraying blood ties. He turned back inside and brewed a cup of strong black coffee. The aroma filled the early morning air. Emily was still sleeping. She knew nothing of what was happening. Richard decided to keep this secret for at least a few more hours. He needed time to think, to map out every step. Jake was still lost in his dreams. But Richard had fully awakened with iron determination. Determination to turn his pain into the sharpest weapon. The Thompson family story was not just about money. It was about how greed had corroded family bonds, about the fake smiles during family dinners, about the secrets hidden behind the perfect facade of a typical American family. And revenge would come coldly, without dramatic outward scenes but powerful enough to destroy everything Jake once believed was certain. Richard sat motionless in the quiet kitchen, the strong black coffee growing cold in his mug. The morning light filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors of their California home. Outside, the ocean whispered its constant rhythm, but inside the Thompson villa, a different kind of silence hung heavy. This was not the peaceful quiet of a happy family. It was the silence that follows betrayal, the kind that cracks the perfect image neighbors envied. The Thompson family had always appeared flawless from the outside. Richard, the self-made businessman who built a successful logistics company from scratch. Emily, the elegant wife who hosted charity events and maintained their social circle with grace. And Jake, their only son, the charming young man who seemed destined to follow in his father's footsteps. Yet behind closed doors, the cracks had been widening for years. Family dinners were the most telling. Every Sunday evening, the three of them would gather around the long oak table in the dining room. Candles flickered, expensive wine was poured, and polite conversation flowed. Richard would ask about Jake's business ventures with genuine interest. Emily would smile warmly and share stories from her garden club. Jake would laugh and talk about his latest ideas, his eyes bright with ambition, but those smiles were often forced. Richard had noticed how Jake's laughter never quite reached his eyes lately. There was a subtle resentment lurking beneath the surface, a jealousy that had grown since Jake's own startup failed 2 years earlier. He had borrowed money from his father then, promising to repay every cent. Richard had given it without hesitation, believing in his son. Now, looking back, that trust felt like the first thread pulled from a fraying rope. Emily sensed the tension too, though she rarely spoke of it. She would glance between her husband and son during those dinners, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening slightly around her wine glass. She wanted to believe her family was still whole, still the ideal American household portrayed in their holiday cards and social media posts. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Jake had changed. He spent more time out late, came home with new clothes and gadgets he could not afford on his own, and avoided eye contact whenever money was mentioned. Richard had tried talking to him privately several times, offering guidance and even a position in his company. Jake always refused, claiming he wanted to make it on his own. Pride mixed with envy created a dangerous cocktail in the young man's heart. That morning, after discovering the credit card charges, Richard did not wake Emily. He let her sleep, knowing the truth would shatter her carefully maintained illusion of family harmony. Instead, he walked through the house slowly, observing every detail as if seeing it for the first time. The family photos on the walls showed happier times. Jake as a child on Richard's shoulders at the beach, the three of them smiling on a ski trip in Aspen, and their last vacation in Hawaii where everything still seemed possible. Those images now felt like lies. The expensive furniture, the art pieces collected over the years, the state-of-the-art kitchen where Emily prepared elaborate meals, all of it built on years of Richard's hard work and sacrifices. Late nights at the office, missed family events, and constant pressure to provide more had taken their toll. And now, his own son had reached into his pocket while he slept. Jake stirred upstairs, his body heavy from the late night of spending. He had fallen asleep with a sense of excitement, imagining the luxuries he could enjoy before quietly returning the money. In his mind, it was just a temporary loan, a way to feel the success he craved. He told himself his father would never miss such a small amount compared to their wealth. Greed had clouded his judgment completely. He did not see it as theft. He saw it as taking what should have been his share anyway. After all, he was the only heir. One day, everything would belong to him. Why wait when he needed it now? These thoughts comforted him as he drifted back into a light sleep, unaware that his father was downstairs, piecing together the full picture of his betrayal. Richard poured himself another cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen island. His mind raced through memories of raising Jake. The Little League games he coached despite a busy schedule, the college tuition he paid in full, the car he gifted on Jake's 21st birthday. Every milestone had been met with love and support. Yet somewhere along the way, that love had been taken for granted. Jake's failures in business were met with more help instead of tough lessons. Richard wondered if he had been too lenient, if his desire to shield his son from hardship had instead bred entitlement. The resentment Jake felt was not born overnight. It had simmered for years, fueled by comparisons to his father's achievements and the easy lifestyle he enjoyed without earning it. Emily finally descended the stairs around 8 o'clock, her silk robe flowing elegantly. She greeted Richard with a soft kiss on the cheek, oblivious to the storm brewing. "Good morning, darling. Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice light and melodic. Richard forced a smile, hiding the turmoil inside. He watched her move gracefully around the kitchen, preparing breakfast as she always did. Fresh fruit, avocado toast, and freshly squeezed orange juice. The routine felt surreal now. How could life continue so normally when everything had shifted? He wanted to tell her immediately, but held back. This was something he needed to process alone first. The betrayal cut too deep to share right away. As the smell of coffee and toast filled the air, Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, yawning and stretching. He looked relaxed, his hair tousled, wearing an expensive t-shirt he had bought the night before with his father's card. "Morning, folks," he said casually, flashing that charming smile. Richard studied his son's face, searching for any sign of guilt. There was none. Jake moved to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and joined them at the island as if nothing had happened. The three of them sat together, exchanging small talk about the weather and weekend plans. Emily laughed at one of Jake's jokes, completely unaware. Richard nodded along, his mind elsewhere. Inside, he felt a cold resolve forming. The perfect family facade was cracking wider with every passing minute, and he would not let it collapse without consequence. The morning unfolded with painful normalcy. Emily suggested they plan a family barbecue for the upcoming weekend. Jake agreed enthusiastically, mentioning a new investment opportunity he had heard about from friends. Richard listened quietly, his responses measured. He noted every word, every hint of Jake's ongoing financial desperation. The stolen credit card was just the latest symptom of a deeper problem. Greed had taken root in his son's heart, twisting the once close bond between father and son into something unrecognizable. Richard remembered how Jake used to look up to him as a boy, eyes full of admiration. Now those eyes only held calculation. By mid-morning, Emily left for her yoga class, leaving father and son alone in the house. The tension thickened in her absence. Richard cleared the breakfast dishes slowly, giving himself time to think. Jake lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone, probably checking the charges or planning more spending. Richard's hands moved mechanically, but his thoughts were sharp and focused. He would not confront Jake yet. Yelling or demanding repayment would achieve nothing lasting. No, this required something far more calculated, something that would mirror the pain of betrayal and force Jake to confront the consequences of his choices. The idea of revenge began to take shape in Richard's mind, not as blind anger, but as a precise plan designed to teach a lesson that money alone could never erase. The villa felt different now. The luxurious surroundings that once symbolized success now highlighted the fractures within. The family that appeared so united to the world was unraveling from within. Richard stood at the window, watching the waves crash in the distance. He thought about all the American families like theirs, where surface perfection hid ugly truths, parents who worked tirelessly, only to be taken advantage of by their own children, siblings who smiled at gatherings while plotting behind backs. Blood ties that should protect instead became weapons. In this quiet moment, Richard made a silent vow. He would expose the rot, not through public scandal, but through a private reckoning that would leave Jake forever changed. Jake glanced up from his phone, sensing something off, but dismissing it as his father's usual seriousness. He had no idea the storm was already gathering. The class facade of their family dinners, the forced laughter, the hidden resentments, all of it was about to be tested in ways he could never imagine. And by the next morning, everything he thought he could take so easily would be gone. Richard remained at the kitchen window long after Jake had wandered back upstairs with his phone still in hand. The waves outside continued their endless rhythm, indifferent to the storm raging inside him. He placed both palms flat on the cool granite countertop, feeling the solid surface beneath his fingers as if it could anchor him against the wave of emotions threatening to pull him under. The betrayal cut deeper than any business deal gone wrong or any financial loss he had ever faced. This was not some stranger exploiting him. This was his own flesh and blood. His son, the boy he had carried on his shoulders through crowded stadiums, the teenager he had stayed up all night with during final exams, the young man he had believed would one day surpass him. Now that same son had reached into his wallet while he slept and taken what was not his to touch. The pain settled heavy in Richard's chest like a stone he could not swallow. He closed his eyes and let the memories flood in without resistance. He remembered the day Jake was born on a rainy afternoon in October 1995. The hospital room had smelled of antiseptic and fresh flowers from Emily's family. Richard had held the tiny newborn in his arms, promising silently to give him the world. He had worked 2 jobs in those early years, building his logistics company from a single truck and a borrowed office space. Late nights at the warehouse turned into early mornings at the breakfast table, where he still made sure to ask Jake about school and dreams. Sacrifices were never announced. They were simply lived. Vacations postponed so Jake could attend private school. Business trips cut short to attend soccer games. Retirement savings dipped into so his son could launch that first failed startup without crushing debt. Every choice had been made with love, with the quiet hope that one day Jake would understand the depth of that devotion. Yet understanding had never come. Instead, resentment had taken its place. Richard replayed the conversation from 2 years earlier when Jake's business collapsed. The young man had stormed into the home office, face flushed with anger and shame. "You never had to struggle like this, Dad," he had said bitterly. "Everything was handed to you on a silver platter after you made it big." The words had stung then, but Richard had brushed them aside as the heat of failure talking. He had written another check, offered more advice, and told himself patience would heal the wound. Now, he saw the truth. That resentment had festered into entitlement. Jake no longer saw his father as a mentor or provider. He saw him as an obstacle between himself and the easy life he believed he deserved by birthright. Tears welled in Richard's eyes, but he blinked them back fiercely. A father's love was supposed to be unbreakable, yet in this moment it felt fragile as glass. He loved Jake still. That was the cruelest part. The love had not vanished with the discovery of the theft. It burned alongside the rage, creating an unbearable tension in his soul. One voice inside him whispered to forgive, to sit down with his son, and talk it through like they had done so many times before. Another voice, colder and sharper, demanded justice. How many more times would he allow himself to be used? How long before Jake's greed destroyed not just the credit card balance, but the entire family foundation? Richard's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the counter harder. He could feel the anger rising like bile, hot and bitter. Yet beneath it lay a profound sadness, the kind that comes when blood ties turn into chains of disappointment. He walked slowly to the living room and sank into the leather armchair that faced the family portrait above the fireplace. The photo had been taken 5 years ago during a summer trip to Maui. All 3 of them smiled brightly against a backdrop of turquoise water and palm trees. Emily looked radiant in her sun hat. Jake, then 22, had his arms slung casually around Richard's shoulders. In that frozen moment, they had looked invincible as a unit. Richard stared at the image until his vision blurred. Where had that unity gone? When had the boy who once begged for bedtime stories become the man who stole in the dark? He thought about all the nights he had driven Jake home from college parties. All the heart-to-heart talks about responsibility and integrity. Had those words meant nothing? Had his sacrifices been reduced to nothing more than a convenient ATM with a pulse? Upstairs, Jake moved around his room with the careless energy of someone who still believed the world owed him. Richard could hear faint music drifting down the staircase, some upbeat track that spoke of success and luxury. The sound twisted the knife deeper. His son felt no guilt, no fear of consequences. That realization sharpened Richard's internal battle. Love urged him to protect Jake from the harsh lessons life had taught him the hard way. Anger demanded that Jake finally feel the weight of his choices. The 2 emotions warred within him, pulling his thoughts in opposite directions, until his head throbbed. He stood up and paced the room, footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floors. The house that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a prison of memories. Emily would be home from yoga soon. Richard knew he could not hide the truth from her forever. but he needed more time to wrestle with his own heart first. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over tensions with gentle words and optimistic plans. Telling her now would force him to confront the reality aloud, and he was not ready. Not while the wound was still raw and bleeding. He needed to decide which path to take, the road of forgiveness that might preserve the family on the surface, or the road of calculated consequence that might shatter it but teach a lasting lesson. In the quiet luxury of their California villa, surrounded by symbols of success, Richard felt utterly alone with his pain. He returned to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, hands still unsteady. The cool liquid did little to ease the tightness in his throat. Flashes of Jake as a child kept returning uninvited. The first bike ride without training wheels, the proud grin when he scored his first goal, the late-night talks about girls and future careers. Those moments had built the foundation of their bond. Now that foundation cracked under the weight of one selfish night. Richard wondered if he had failed as a father by giving too much and expecting too little in return. Had his unconditional support created a son who viewed love as an endless resource rather than something that required reciprocity? The question haunted him, circling endlessly in his mind. Yet even in the depth of this sorrow, a small seed of resolve began to sprout. Richard was not a man who crumbled under pressure. He had built an empire through setbacks and long hours. He would not let this betrayal define him or destroy what remained of his family. The revenge forming in his thoughts was not born of pure hatred. It came from a place of exhausted love, the kind that refuses to watch a child destroy himself without intervention. He would make Jake lose $2 million the next morning, not to ruin him, but to force him to confront the emptiness of greed. The plan was still hazy, but the intent was crystal clear. Pain would mirror pain. Loss would answer loss. And perhaps, in the ashes of that financial ruin, something honest could finally grow between them. Richard glanced at the clock. Time moved forward whether he was ready or not. Jake's footsteps sounded on the stairs again, casual and unaware. The young man entered the kitchen, grabbed an apple from the bowl, and bit into it with a loud crunch. "Everything okay, Dad?" he asked lightly, as if the world had not shifted on its axis overnight. Richard met his son's eyes and managed a nod. Inside, the war between love and anger continued its fierce battle. Blood ties had never felt more binding or more painful. The morning stretched on, heavy with unspoken truths, while the perfect American family facade held for just a little while longer. Richard stood alone in the spacious home office on the ground floor. The door closed firmly behind him. The room smelled of aged leather and polished wood, a sanctuary where he had built his empire over decades. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows overlooking the ocean, but he barely noticed the view. His mind, usually occupied with contracts and logistics routes, now turned to something far more personal and dangerous: revenge. He sat down at the large mahogany desk, his hands still slightly unsteady from the emotional storm earlier. He took a deep breath, forcing the pain and anger down into a controlled burn. There would be time for feelings later. Right now, he needed clarity. Cold, precise, business-like clarity. This would not be a loud confrontation or an emotional outburst. Richard knew that direct anger would only push Jake further into denial or defiance. No. The revenge had to be surgical. It had to strike where Jake was most vulnerable: his greed and his overconfidence. And it had to happen fast. By the next morning, Jake would lose $2 million. Not 1 cent more, not 1 cent less. The number was deliberate. It represented the accumulated pain, the years of sacrifice, and the depth of the betrayal. $2 million would be the exact price for breaking a father's trust. He opened his laptop and began typing notes in an encrypted document. First, he needed to lure something irresistible to a young man desperate to prove himself and hungry for quick wealth. Jake had always talked about wanting to make it big on his own, to show his father that he didn't need handouts. Richard would use that very desire against him. Over the years, Richard had built an extensive network in the investment world. He knew people who specialized in high-risk, high-reward opportunities, the kind that looked legitimate on the surface, but could be made to collapse at exactly the right moment. His fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing confidence. He recalled a contact named Victor Lang, a sharp financial operator who owed him several favors from past business deals. Victor ran a private investment group that specialized in short-term real estate development projects in emerging markets. These deals often promised returns of 50 to 100% within weeks. To someone like Jake, who had just stolen over $100,000 to fuel his lifestyle, such an opportunity would feel like destiny. Richard would plant the seed casually, making Jake believe he had discovered the deal himself or that his father was reluctantly sharing an exclusive chance. Richard leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as the plan took shape. He would mention during a conversation that he had been invited to invest in a new luxury resort project in Mexico, but he was hesitant because of the high minimum entry, $2 million. He would say it was too risky even for him, knowing full well that Jake's greed would make him see it as the golden ticket he had been waiting for. Then, Richard would subtly guide Jake toward contacting Victor directly, making the young man feel like he was outsmarting his father by acting independently. The key was timing. Everything had to unfold within the next 24 hours. Richard checked his watch. It was still morning. He had time to set the pieces in motion before Emily returned home. He picked up his phone and sent a carefully worded message to Victor. "Old friend, I have a situation. Need a convincing high-return opportunity that can be structured to fail completely within 24 to 36 hours. $2 million exposure. Full details later. Can you help?" He knew Victor would understand without asking too many questions. Favors in their world went both ways. As he waited for the reply, Richard allowed himself a moment to feel the weight of what he was doing. He was about to orchestrate the financial ruin of his own son. The thought brought a sharp pang to his chest. Love and justice remained locked in their silent war inside him. Part of him still wanted to walk upstairs, hug Jake, and try to fix things the old way. But the deeper part, the part that had been wounded by betrayal in his own home, knew that easy forgiveness would only breed more betrayal later. Jake needed to feel real consequences. He needed to taste the fear of losing everything he thought he could take so easily. Victor's reply came quickly. "Understood. I can have documents and a pitch ready by this afternoon. Call set up for tomorrow morning. Make it look exclusive." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The machinery of revenge was now moving. He stood up and paced the office slowly, hands clasped behind his back. He visualized every step, the casual conversation at lunch, the planted information, Jake's growing excitement, the late-night call to Victor, the wire transfer the next morning, and finally, the devastating collapse. No screaming matches, no public humiliation. Just a quiet, elegant destruction of Jake's illusions of easy money. He thought about the psychological aspect. Jake would not just lose money. He would lose the very thing he craved most, the feeling of being smarter than his father. The plan would make Jake believe he had seized a rare opportunity behind Richard's back. When it all disappeared, the shame would be crushing. Richard wanted his son to understand that greed had a price, and that price was far higher than $100,000 stolen in the night. The office felt heavier now. The family photos on the shelves seemed to watch him with silent judgment. Richard stopped in front of one showing him and Jake fishing together when the boy was 12. He touched the frame lightly. "I am sorry it has to be this way, son," he whispered. But his voice carried no regret, only weary determination. He had given Jake every advantage. Now he would give him the hardest lesson of his life. By the time Emily's car pulled into the driveway, Richard had already sent 2 more strategic messages and locked the plan's foundation in place. He composed his face into the calm, slightly tired expression his wife knew so well. When she entered the house carrying fresh groceries, he greeted her with a gentle kiss, hiding the calculated storm behind his eyes. Jake came downstairs shortly after, still acting normal, still carrying the invisible weight of his secret theft. Lunch was served on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The 3 of them sat together under the warm California sun. Richard chose his moment carefully. Between bites of grilled salmon, he mentioned casually, almost reluctantly, "I received an interesting proposal today. A private investment in a high-end resort development down in Cabo. Minimum $2 million. The returns look exceptional, but the risk is substantial. I told them I would think about it, but honestly, it feels too aggressive even for me right now." He watched Jake's reaction closely without seeming to. The young man's eyes flickered with immediate interest. Richard continued speaking in a measured tone, planting seeds of exclusivity and urgency. They are only letting in a few select investors. Closes tomorrow morning if I want in. He sighed, as if the decision weighed heavily on him. Inside, his heart beat with cold precision. That is when the game had begun. Jake leaned forward slightly, trying to appear casual. 2 million? That is a big number, Dad. What kind of returns are we talking about? Richard smiled faintly. The perfect mix of hesitation and temptation. He explained just enough details to hook his son without giving away the full picture. The numbers sounded impressive. The timeline felt urgent. Everything was designed to appeal to Jake's deepest desires. Richard could see the wheels turning in his son's mind. Greed was already taking over. Jake asked more questions, his voice eager now. Richard answered sparingly, always leaving room for Jake to fill in the blanks himself. The afternoon stretched on with surface-level normalcy while beneath it, Richard's meticulously crafted revenge moved forward step by calculated step. Emily chatted about her yoga class and upcoming charity event, unaware of the tension humming between father and son. Richard nodded and smiled at the right moments, but his mind stayed locked on the plan. He had suppressed his raw emotions completely now. They no longer clouded his thinking. Instead, they had been forged into something sharper, something colder. Later, when Jake excused himself to make a phone call upstairs, Richard allowed himself one quiet moment of reflection. He stood at the terrace railing, the sea breeze brushing across his face. The plan was no longer just an idea. It was alive, breathing, and moving exactly as he had calculated. By tomorrow morning, his son would learn that some opportunities come with a devastating price. And Richard would be there, watching silently as the consequences unfolded. No direct confrontation, no angry words, only the elegant, invisible hand of justice delivered through the very system Jake had tried to exploit. The father had transformed his pain into purpose, the revenge was set, and the next morning would bring the first real test of whether blood ties could survive such a calculated blow. The afternoon sun hung high over the California coast, warming the terrace where the Thompson family lingered after lunch. Richard leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, maintaining the calm fatherly demeanor he had perfected over years of boardroom negotiations. He had planted the seed about the Cabo Resort investment with surgical precision, and now he watched it take root in Jake's mind. Emily chatted lightly about her plans for the garden, completely unaware of the undercurrent swirling between father and son. Richard nodded at her words, smiling at the right moments, but his attention stayed locked on Jake. The young man's eyes had that familiar spark, the one that appeared whenever money and opportunity collided. Richard knew exactly how to escalate without seeming eager. He waited until Emily excused herself to take a phone call inside the house. The moment she disappeared through the sliding glass doors, he turned to Jake with a measured sigh. "Look, son, I probably shouldn't even mention this again, but that resort deal I told you about earlier, Victor Lang, an old business associate of mine, just sent over the confidential summary. It is structured as a private placement. Minimum commitment is 2 million, but the projected return in 30 days is north of 80%. They are developing a luxury eco-resort with pre-sold luxury villas. The numbers look almost too good, which is why I am sitting on the fence." He slid his phone across the table, screen open to a professionally formatted PDF that Victor had prepared and sent within the hour. The document was flawless, glossy renderings of the resort, financial projections highlighted in green, and a list of limited investors that included names Jake would recognize from the tech and real estate world. Richard had instructed Victor to make it look exclusive, urgent, and slightly out of reach for most people. Jake picked up the phone immediately, scrolling with increasing intensity. His breathing changed subtly, becoming quicker, more focused. Richard observed every micro-expression without comment. Greed was flaring in his son's eyes like a lit match in dry grass. Jake finally looked up, trying and failing to hide his excitement. "Dad, this is insane. 80% in a month? Why are you hesitating? You have the capital sitting there doing nothing in that holding account." Richard shrugged, playing the reluctant mentor perfectly. "Because nothing is guaranteed, Jake. Real estate developments in Mexico carry political risks, currency fluctuations, and construction delays. I have seen deals like this collapse overnight. Besides, 2 million is not pocket change, even for me. I would rather wait and see how the first phase performs." The words were chosen with care. Richard knew Jake hated being told something was too risky for his father. It triggered that deep-seated need to prove himself, the same resentment that had led to the credit card theft in the first place. Jake leaned forward, voice dropping as if sharing a secret. But what if someone younger, someone hungrier, got in on this? The summary says, they are only accepting 5 more investors before closing the window tomorrow morning. This could be the break I have been waiting for. I could finally show you I can build something big on my own. Richard kept his face neutral, though inside he felt the cold satisfaction of the trap snapping shut another inch. He had anticipated this exact response. It is your decision, son. I am not pushing you either way. If you want, I can introduce you to Victor directly. But remember, once the wire goes out, the funds are locked for the full term. No early exits. That is the rule. He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel heavy. Of course, you would need to move fast, and you would need liquid capital. I assume you have been managing your own account since the last business setback. Jake's mind was already racing ahead. He had the $100,000 he had spent the night before still fresh in his memory, but more importantly, he had access to additional credit lines he had quietly opened, using his father's good name and some creative paperwork. In his head, he was already calculating how to pull together the $2 million. He could max out the remaining available credit on the card he had used last night, combine it with a short-term bridge loan from a contact of his own, and present it as his independent move. The thought made his pulse quicken. This was not just an investment. This was his declaration of independence. He would take the opportunity his father was too cautious to seize, prove he was smarter, faster, bolder. Richard watched the transformation with clinical detachment. Jake's posture changed. His shoulders squared, his jaw set with determination. The same young man who had casually stolen from his sleeping father now saw himself as a visionary entrepreneur. I want in, Jake said, voice firm. Introduce me to Victor. I will handle the funding myself. No handouts. This is my play. Richard nodded slowly, as if considering the request with fatherly concern. Inside, his mind ticked through the next steps like a well-oiled machine. Victor was already on standby for a video call within the hour. The documents would be sent to Jake's email under a private client portal. The wire instructions would be crystal clear, routing the $2 million straight into an account Victor controlled, one that could be collapsed with a single command the following morning. Emily returned to the terrace carrying a fresh pitcher of iced tea, her smile bright and unsuspecting. What are you two looking so serious about? She asked, pouring for both men. Richard answered smoothly, just talking business. Jake might be exploring a new opportunity. Nothing set in stone yet. Jake nodded, forcing a casual grin, but his foot tapped rapidly under the table. The greed that had once been a quiet ember now burned hot. He excused himself shortly after, claiming he needed to check some numbers upstairs. Richard knew the truth. Jake was already calling contacts, moving money, and preparing the transfer. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was live and breathing. Alone again with Emily, Richard reached across the table and took her hand, masking the calculated storm inside him. She squeezed back, talking about weekend plans, and for a fleeting moment Richard felt the familiar pang of guilt. He was using their son's own flaws against him. Yet the memory of the credit card statement flashing on his phone screen hardened his resolve. Jake had chosen this path the moment he reached into that wallet in the dark. Now Richard was simply ensuring the consequences arrived on schedule. Upstairs, Jake sat at his desk, laptop open, heart pounding with excitement. He had already received the secure link from Victor. The call was scheduled for 4 o'clock. On screen, the resort renderings looked even more impressive. Victor's voice on the recorded intro video was smooth and professional, emphasizing the limited window and the elite circle of investors. Jake felt chosen, special, unstoppable. He began drafting the wire transfer instructions in his banking app, fingers flying across the screen. The $2 million would come from a combination of the remaining credit available on his father's card, which he had already quietly extended through an online request the week before, and a personal line he had opened in his own name using forged income statements. In his mind, it was all temporary. Once the 80% return hit, he would repay everything with profit to spare and finally stand tall in front of his father. Richard, downstairs in the office, received a discreet text from Victor confirming the call setup. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. He allowed himself one slow, controlled breath. The first financial trap was now fully deployed. Jake was diving in voluntarily, eyes wide open, driven by the very greed that had led him to steal in the first place. By tomorrow morning, that $2 million would vanish like smoke. No screaming, no courtroom, just the quiet, devastating realization that easy money always came with a hidden price. The sun began its slow descent toward the Pacific, painting the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The Thompson villa remained outwardly peaceful, the perfect American family enjoying a quiet afternoon. But inside, the gears of revenge turned with relentless precision. Jake believed he was seizing his future. Richard knew he was watching his son walk straight into the carefully constructed mirror of his own betrayal. The stage was set. The curtain would rise on the final act the next morning. The golden light of the setting sun painted the Pacific in deep oranges and reds as Jake sat alone in his upstairs room, laptop glowing in front of him. His heart raced with a kind of electric thrill he had not felt in years. The video call with Victor Lang had ended 20 minutes earlier, and every word still echoed in his head like a promise of destiny. Victor's smooth, confident voice had laid out the details again. $2 million, wired by 9 o'clock the next morning, locked for 30 days, and then the projected 80% return, wired straight back. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling with a wide, almost manic smile. This was it. This was the break he had been waiting for his entire adult life. No more scraping by, no more asking his father for help, no more feeling like the disappointing son who could never quite measure up. Greed surged through him like a drug, hot and intoxicating. He closed his eyes and let the fantasies unfold in vivid color. He saw himself stepping out of a sleek black sports car in front of the new resort in Cabo, the kind of place celebrities and billionaires visited. He pictured the private villa with ocean views that would be his personal reward for being one of the first investors. Designer clothes, a watch that cost more than most people's cars, maybe even a yacht moored nearby for weekend parties. The money from this deal would change everything. He would repay the credit card charges quietly, cover the bridge loans he had quietly arranged, and still have more than enough left to launch his own venture. His father would finally look at him with respect instead of that quiet, disappointed gaze. Jake could almost taste the freedom. $2 million felt like nothing when the payoff was so enormous. It was not theft anymore in his mind. It was investment. Smart, bold investment using resources that would soon multiply. He stood up and paced the room, energy crackling through his veins. The stolen spending from the night before no longer weighed on him. That $100,000 was already forgotten, a minor footnote compared to what was coming. Jake opened his banking apps on both his phone and laptop, fingers flying across the screens. He had spent the last hour pulling together every available dollar. The remaining credit limit on his father's card had been quietly extended through an online request he had made weeks earlier under a fake business name. Another personal line of credit he had opened using slightly inflated income statements brought the total close to the target. A quick transfer from a small account in his own name filled the final gap. $2 million exactly. He stared at the confirmation screen, pulse pounding. The wire instructions from Victor were already copied into the transfer field. All he had to do was hit send at the right moment the next morning. Downstairs, Richard moved through the house with deliberate calm. He had excused himself from the terrace after dinner, claiming he needed to review some contracts. In truth, he had slipped into the home office and activated the discreet monitoring software he had installed on the family network years ago for security reasons. Now, it served a different purpose. He watched the live feed of Jake's laptop activity in a small window on his own screen. Every tab Jake opened, every banking login, every message to Victor, appeared in real time. Richard sat motionless, eyes fixed on the data stream, his face showing nothing to the empty room. He noted the exact amounts Jake was moving, the timing of each transfer, and the growing frenzy in his son's digital footprint. The greed was exploding exactly as predicted. Jake was not hesitating. He was diving in headfirst, eyes wide open, driven by the same hunger that had led him to steal the credit card in the first place. Richard felt no triumph, only a quiet, cold focus. He had anticipated every move. The way Jake justified the numbers in his head, the way he rewrote the story from theft to opportunity, the way he dreamed of outshining his father. It was all there in the data. Richard sipped his coffee slowly, the mug steady in his hand. He did not smile. He did not allow himself any visible reaction. This was not about winning. It was about completing the mirror. Jake had taken without asking. Now he would lose without understanding until it was too late. Upstairs, Jake's fantasies grew even bolder. He opened a new browser tab and searched for luxury real estate in Cabo, scrolling through multi-million-dollar villas with infinity pools and private beaches. He imagined hosting his first party there, inviting old friends who had doubted him, maybe even a few influencers who could help launch his personal brand. The thought made him laugh out loud, a short, sharp sound of pure excitement. He whispered to himself, "This is finally my time." The words felt true. All those years of watching his father build an empire while he struggled had led to this single, perfect moment. He would prove he was not just Richard Thompson's son. He would become something bigger. He fired off a quick encrypted message to Victor confirming the wire details for the morning. Victor replied within seconds. "Funds received by 9:15 tomorrow and the deal locks. Welcome to the inner circle." Jake's chest swelled with pride. Inner circle. Those words tasted like victory. He leaned back again, hands behind his head, and let the daydreams roll on. He pictured the conversation with his father. After the 30 days, he would casually mention the profits, watch Richard's eyes widen in surprise, and finally hear the words he had waited for his whole life. "You did good." The image was so clear it felt real. Greed had completely taken the wheel now. It pushed aside any lingering doubt about the source of the money. It silenced the small voice that whispered about consequences. All Jake could see was the golden future waiting on the other side of that wire transfer. Richard continued his silent watch from the office. He tracked Jake's search history, the luxury listings, the excited messages to a couple of close friends, hinting at a big score, without giving details. Every action confirmed the plan was working perfectly. Jake was investing heavily, not just financially but emotionally. He had pinned his entire identity on this deal. When it vanished the next morning, the loss would strike far deeper than the dollar amount. Richard closed the monitoring window after a while, not because he needed to, but because he had seen enough. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened ocean. The house was quiet now. Emily had gone to bed early, tired from her day. Jake remained upstairs, lost in his dreams of wealth. The father allowed himself one slow breath. The greed that had poisoned his son's heart was now the very weapon turning against him. Richard felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He was not enjoying this. He was simply executing it with the same precision he used in every major business decision. Jake had chosen the path of easy money in the dark. Now he was running down it at full speed, eyes fixed on the horizon, completely unaware that the road ended in a cliff. Upstairs, Jake finally closed his laptop around midnight. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him. His mind refused to slow down. Visions of private jets, exclusive clubs, and financial independence danced behind his eyes. He fell asleep with a smile still on his face, the kind of smile that only comes when greed has convinced a man he is invincible. Down the hall, in the master bedroom, Richard lay beside Emily, eyes open in the dark. He did not sleep. He simply waited. The final hours before the morning wire transfer ticked by in perfect silence. Everything was in motion. Jake's greed had reached its peak, burning bright and reckless, and Richard watched from the shadows, patient, invisible, and utterly prepared for what the next sunrise would bring. The Thompson villa rested under a clear California night sky, stars sharp above the ocean. On the surface, it was still the perfect family home. Inside, one man dreamed of riches that would never arrive, while another guarded the quiet machinery that would take them away. The stage was no longer being set. It was fully lit, and the performance of a lifetime was scheduled for first light. Funbai. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the curtains of Jake's upstairs bedroom, casting soft shadows across the walls. He had slept only a few restless hours, yet his body felt wired with leftover excitement from the night before. The $2 million wire transfer was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp, less than 3 hours away. Jake sat up in bed, rubbed his eyes, and reached for his phone. The screen lit up with a new message from Victor Lang. Funds must clear by 9:15 at the latest. Small administrative delay on our end, but everything is still on track. Confirm receipt when sent. Jake read the words twice. A small administrative delay. It sounded harmless enough. He told himself it was normal in high-value private deals. Still, something about the phrasing felt slightly off, like a faint crack in the perfect picture he had painted in his mind. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and walked to the window. The ocean outside looked calm under the early morning sky, but inside Jake a new, unfamiliar tension stirred. He tried to shake it off. This was the biggest move of his life. 80% return in 30 days. He opened his laptop and refreshed the secure investor portal Victor had sent. The documents still looked flawless, the resort renderings sharp and luxurious. Yet as he scrolled, he noticed a tiny detail he had missed the night before. One of the projected timelines listed the first phase completion as subject to final regulatory approval in Mexico. The phrase had not stood out yesterday. Now it lingered in his thoughts like a quiet warning. Jake closed the laptop a little too forcefully. "It is fine," he muttered to himself. "Everything big has small hurdles." Downstairs in the home office, Richard had been awake since 4 o'clock. He sat at his desk with perfect posture, eyes fixed on multiple screens. One window showed live bank activity alerts. Another displayed the encrypted chat with Victor. A third monitored the family Wi-Fi traffic. Richard typed a short message to Victor. "Proceed with the collapse protocol exactly at 9:45. Make the failure look like a regulatory freeze combined with partner default. No trace back to me." Victor replied instantly. "Locked and ready. The account will go dark within minutes of confirmation." Richard leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. The noose was tightening. Every second brought the plan closer to its precise, devastating finish. He felt no rush, only the steady pulse of control. Jake's greed had done most of the work. Now Richard simply guided the final threads into place. Jake came downstairs a few minutes after 7, trying to appear casual. Emily was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast, humming softly as she sliced fresh fruit. Richard stood at the coffee machine, pouring 2 mugs with steady hands. "Morning, son," he said without turning around. His voice carried the same calm tone it always did. Jake studied his father's back for a moment, longer than usual. Something felt different this morning, though he could not name it. Maybe it was the way Richard's shoulders sat a fraction too straight. Or perhaps it was the silence in the house that seemed heavier than normal. Jake forced a smile and accepted the mug his father offered. "Big day ahead?" Richard asked lightly, as if discussing the weather. Jake's stomach tightened. "Just some business stuff," he replied, keeping his answer short. He took a sip of coffee, but it tasted bitter on his tongue. They sat at the kitchen island together. Emily chatted about her plans to visit a new art gallery later, completely unaware of the undercurrents. Jake nodded at the right moments, but his mind kept drifting back to that single phrase in the investor documents. Subject to final regulatory approval. He pulled out his phone under the table and quickly searched for recent news about Mexican resort developments. Nothing alarming appeared, yet the search itself made his pulse quicken. Why was he checking? He had never second-guessed an opportunity like this before. The doubt felt foreign, almost insulting to the bold vision he had built overnight. He told himself it was just nerves. Big money always came with nerves. Richard watched his son from the corner of his eye, while pretending to read the morning financial headlines on his tablet. He noticed the way Jake's thumb kept scrolling on the phone, the slight furrow between his brows, the way he shifted in his seat. The anxiety was beginning to bloom exactly on schedule. Richard sent another discreet text to Victor under the table. "Target is showing early signs of unease. Keep the tone confident, but add one more small detail about a minor paperwork hold." Seconds later, Jake's phone buzzed with a new message from Victor. "Quick update. One final compliance form needs a digital signature before the wire clears. Attached. Takes 30 seconds. Jake opened the attachment. It looked legitimate, yet the request felt sudden. His finger hovered over the signature field. The unease grew from a whisper to a low hum in his chest. He excused himself from the table and walked out to the terrace, phone still in hand. The sea breeze cooled his face, but it did nothing to settle the growing restlessness inside. He signed the form anyway, telling himself speed was everything. The deal closed at 9. He could not afford to look hesitant now. Back inside, Richard had already moved to the living room, pretending to organize some papers. In truth, he was confirming the final collapse sequence with Victor. The account Jake would wire into was set to freeze at exactly 9:45, routed through a series of offshore entities that would appear as a legitimate regulatory hold, followed by a partner default. No money would ever reach Mexico. No resort would ever be built. The $2 million would vanish into a black hole designed to look like bad luck, not sabotage. Jake returned to the kitchen, forcing a confident expression. "Everything is set," he announced to no one in particular. Emily smiled warmly. Richard simply nodded, his face unreadable. "Glad to hear it, son." The words were kind, yet they landed like a weight on Jake's shoulders. For the first time, he wondered if his father suspected something. Had Richard noticed the credit card activity? The thought sent a fresh spike of anxiety through him. He checked his banking app again. The $2 million sat ready, poised to leave his accounts. His palms felt damp. He wiped them on his shorts and told himself it was just the excitement. But the doubt refused to leave. It grew with every passing minute, feeding on small things. Victor's slightly delayed replies. The new compliance form. The way his father seemed too calm this morning. Richard stepped into the office for a moment, closing the door softly behind him. He allowed himself one brief look at the monitoring feed. Jake's laptop was open again upstairs. The young man was frantically cross-checking resort reviews and regulatory news. The anxiety was escalating exactly as planned. Richard typed one final instruction to Victor. Initiate the shadow protocol at 9:30. Let him see the funds leave, then watch them freeze. He closed the laptop with quiet finality. The noose was now fully cinched. Every loose end had been secured. Jake's greed had pulled him to the edge. Richard's precision would push him over. By 8:45, Jake was pacing the hallway upstairs. His heart beat faster than normal. He told himself it was normal pre-deal jitters. Yet the vague signs kept multiplying in his mind. The administrative delay, the sudden compliance form. The way Victor's messages now felt a fraction too polished. He opened the investor portal one last time. Everything still looked perfect, but the perfection itself began to feel suspicious. He glanced at the clock. 13 minutes until the wire. His mouth felt dry. He walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. When he looked in the mirror, his own eyes stared back with a hint of fear he refused to name. Downstairs, Richard stood by the large windows, watching the ocean. His hands remained steady. The plan had moved beyond strategy into inevitability. In exactly 1 hour, Jake would watch $2 million disappear into thin air. The revenge would be complete, silent, and devastating. No raised voices, no public scene, only the private collapse of a young man's illusions. Richard felt the quiet satisfaction of a job about to be finished. The family facade would hold for a few more minutes. Then the mirror of betrayal would finally shatter. Jake returned to his room, sat at his desk, and stared at the transfer screen. His finger hovered over the send button. The unease had grown into a steady, gnawing pressure in his chest. He could not explain it. Nothing concrete had gone wrong. Yet something deep inside him whispered that the ground beneath this deal was softer than it appeared. He took a long breath, pushed the doubt aside one final time, and prepared to hit send. Upstairs and downstairs, father and son existed in the same house but in completely different worlds. One man tightened the final knot of his carefully woven revenge. The other felt the first real threads of anxiety pulling tight around his future. The morning sun climbed higher over the California coast, indifferent to the silent drama unfolding inside the Thompson villa. The clock ticked toward 9. And the noose grew tighter with every second. Jake's finger hovered over the send button for only a heartbeat longer before he pressed it. The screen flashed confirmation. $2 million left his accounts in a single, silent transaction. He stared at the digital receipt, heart hammering with a wild mix of triumph and lingering nerves. The funds had cleared. They were gone from his side, now sitting safely in the private escrow account Victor had described. Jake let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair, a shaky laugh escaping his lips. "It is done," he whispered to the empty room. For a moment, the unease from earlier melted away. He pictured the 80% return already growing in his mind, compounding into a future he had only dreamed about. Freedom, respect, the end of living in his father's shadow. He stood up, stretched his arms wide, and allowed himself a brief victory smile. The California morning sun streamed through the window, warm and golden, as if the universe itself approved. Downstairs, Richard remained perfectly still in the home office. His monitoring screen updated instantly. The wire had cleared at 9:03. He sent one final message to Victor. Initiate collapse at 9:45 exactly. Victor replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Richard closed the laptop lid with quiet finality. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, and joined Emily at the island. She was reading a magazine, completely unaware of the silent earthquake about to hit their son. Richard's face showed nothing but mild interest in the weather forecast she mentioned. Inside, his pulse remained steady. The revenge had moved from planning to execution. Now came the part he had calculated most carefully, watching his son confront the mirror of his own betrayal. Upstairs, Jake refreshed the investor portal every 30 seconds. At 9:20, the status still read, "Funds received, processing." He paced the room, energy buzzing through his veins. He sent Victor a quick message. "All set on my end. When do I see the confirmation lock?" No immediate reply. Jake told himself it was normal. High-value deals moved slowly at first. He checked his banking apps again. The $2 million was gone, but the emptiness on the screen felt strangely satisfying. Soon, it would be replaced by something much larger. He imagined calling his father later that afternoon, casually mentioning the deal, watching Richard's eyebrows rise in genuine surprise. The fantasy felt so real he could almost hear the pride in his father's voice. 9:38. Jake's phone buzzed. A new message from Victor appeared. Minor regulatory hold on the escrow side. Funds are safe, but movement is temporarily frozen for compliance review. Should clear by 10. Standard procedure. Jake frowned. Another hold. The unease from earlier returned, sharper now. He typed back quickly. "How long exactly?" No reply. He refreshed the portal. On. The status had changed to "Funds received, under review." His stomach tightened. He opened another browser tab and searched frantically for similar delays in Mexican real estate investments. Forum posts appeared, some mentioning regulatory freezes that lasted days. Jake's mouth went dry. He told himself it was nothing, but the clock kept ticking. At 9:45 exactly, everything changed. Jake's banking apps lit up with simultaneous alerts. The escrow account status flipped to transaction reversed. Partner default triggered. The investor portal went completely blank, then reloaded with a stark red banner. Deal suspended due to unforeseen regulatory intervention. All committed funds returned to origin accounts within 24 hours. Jake stared, uncomprehending. Returned? He refreshed again. The page would not load. He tried the banking app. The $2 million that had left his accounts 30 minutes earlier now showed as pending reversal, funds unavailable. His heart slammed against his ribs. "No," he muttered. No. He called Victor's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. A recorded message stated the number was temporarily out of service. Panic hit him like a physical blow. Jake's hands began to shake. He stood up too fast, knocking his chair backward. The room spun. $2 million. Gone. Not just delayed, vanished into a black hole of red banners and automated messages. He ran to the window, staring at the ocean as if it could somehow fix this. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. This could not be happening. He had checked everything. The documents looked perfect. Victor had sounded so professional. Now the portal was dead, the phone number disconnected. Jake's mind raced through every worst-case scenario. Regulatory freeze. Partner default. The words from the message burned behind his eyes. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, opening his laptop again with trembling fingers. Every refresh brought the same result. The money was not coming back. Not today. Not ever. Richard heard the crash from upstairs, the chair hitting the floor. He set his coffee down slowly, expression unchanged. Emily looked up from her magazine. "What was that?" she asked. Richard shrugged lightly. "Probably Jake dropping something. You know how he gets when he is working." He walked to the bottom of the stairs and called up in a calm voice. "Everything all right up there, son?" No answer. Only the sound of frantic typing and Jake's voice rising in pitch. Richard returned to the kitchen, heart steady. The collapse was unfolding exactly as designed. Victor had already dissolved the shell entities. The $2 million sat in a temporary holding pattern that would eventually route back as a failed investment with no traceable connection to Richard. Clean. Surgical. Devastating. Jake's panic deepened into pure terror. He dialed every contact he had used the night before. Friends who had hinted at the deal. No one answered. He opened his credit card statements. The original 100,000 from 2 nights ago now felt like a distant memory compared to this abyss. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His chest tightened until he could barely breathe. "This is not real," he whispered repeatedly. He imagined the consequences crashing down. The credit lines he had maxed. The forged documents. His father's card still sitting in the middle of it all. If the reversal did not happen cleanly, the banks would come looking. Questions would be asked. His entire life could unravel in hours. The luxurious future he had pictured only minutes earlier now mocked him from the shadows of his mind. Private villas, yachts, respect, all of it dissolved into nothing. He stumbled downstairs, face pale, eyes wild. Emily stood up when she saw him. "Jake, honey, what is wrong?" He ignored her, moving straight to the living room where Richard sat reading the newspaper with perfect composure. "Dad," Jake's voice cracked. "Something went wrong with the deal. The money, it is gone. The portal crashed. Victor is not answering. 2 million, it is just gone." His words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Richard looked up slowly, folding the paper with deliberate care. His expression remained concerned but controlled. "Slow down, son. What money? What deal?" Jake's hands clenched into fists. The panic made his voice rise. "The resort investment. The one you told me about yesterday. I wired the 2 million this morning. Now it is frozen. Reversed. I do not know what to do." Richard stood up, placing a steady hand on Jake's shoulder. The touch felt both comforting and unbearable. "Let me see the details," he said quietly. Jake pulled out his phone with shaking fingers, showing the red banners, the disconnected number, the banking alerts. Richard studied the screen for a long moment, his face giving nothing away. Inside, he felt the quiet satisfaction of precision. The plan had worked flawlessly. Jake was breaking right in front of him. "This looks bad," Richard said at last, voice low and measured. "These private deals can collapse fast when regulations hit. I warned you about the risks." Jake's knees nearly buckled. The words landed like blows. He had done this to himself. He had ignored every small warning sign. Greed had blinded him completely. Emily moved closer, confusion turning to alarm. 2 million? Jake, where did you get 2 million? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jake could not answer. His mind spiraled into deeper panic. The stolen credit card, the extended limits, the forged papers. Everything he had hidden now threatened to explode into the open. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. His breathing grew rapid and shallow. "I am ruined," he whispered. "Everything is gone. I am going to lose it all." Tears of pure terror stung his eyes. The charming, confident young man who had stolen from his father in the night was gone. In his place sat a broken figure, trembling under the weight of consequences he had never imagined. Richard watched in silence, the omniscient narrator of his own revenge. He saw the exact moment Jake's world shattered, the widened eyes, the ashen face, the way his son's shoulders collapsed inward. The $2 million had vanished without a trace, exactly as planned. No dramatic arrest. No courtroom battle. Just a quiet, elegant financial implosion that left Jake drowning in the same emptiness he had created when he reached into that wallet 2 nights earlier. The morning sun continued to shine through the large windows, bathing the perfect California living room in warm light. Yet inside the Thompson villa, the perfect family facade had finally begun to crack wide open. Jake's extreme panic filled the space like a living thing, raw and uncontrollable. And Richard stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, and utterly in control of the storm he had unleashed. The living room of the Thompson villa fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Jake's ragged breathing. He remained on the couch, head buried in his hands, shoulders shaking as the full weight of the $2 million loss crashed over him again and again. Emily stood frozen a few steps away, her magazine forgotten on the coffee table. Her eyes darted between her husband and son, confusion rapidly turning to alarm. "Jake, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. $2 million. From where? Tell me this is some kind of mistake. Richard remained standing near the window, his posture calm and composed, the same steady presence he had maintained through every boardroom crisis. He said nothing at first. He simply watched his son unravel, the omniscient narrator of the destruction he had so carefully engineered. Jake lifted his head slowly. Tears streaked his face. His usual charming smile had vanished, replaced by raw panic and something deeper. something that looked like the first cracks of genuine regret. "Mom, I took Dad's credit card 2 nights ago. I spent over $100,000. I thought I could pay it back. Then Dad mentioned that resort deal, and I saw my chance. I wired everything this morning. 2 million. It is gone. The portal crashed. Victor disappeared. I am finished." The confession spilled out in broken sentences, each word heavier than the last. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. She sank into the nearest armchair, color draining from her face. The perfect family image she had fought so hard to preserve shattered in that instant. "You stole from your own father?" she whispered. "Jake, how could you?" Richard finally spoke, his voice low and measured, carrying the quiet authority of a man who had already decided the outcome. "It is not just the money, son. It is the fact that you reached into my wallet while I slept. You looked me in the eye at breakfast the next morning and said nothing. You sat at our table, ate the food your mother prepared, and planned to take 2 million more behind our backs." Jake flinched, as if struck. He stood up unsteadily, pacing the room with frantic energy. "Dad, I know. I was stupid. Greedy. I thought this deal would fix everything. I wanted to prove I could do something big on my own. I never meant to hurt you like this. Please, you have to help me. Call your contacts. Fix this. I will pay you back every cent. I swear on my life." His voice cracked on the last words. The regret was real now, pouring out in desperate waves. He saw his father's face clearly for the first time in years, not as an obstacle but as the man who had given him everything and received betrayal in return. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Richard, searching for the husband who always fixed things. "Richard, say something. This is our son. We can still work through this together." But Richard did not move toward her. He kept his gaze locked on Jake, eyes steady and unblinking. The calm in his voice never wavered. "There is nothing left to fix, Emily. Not the way you think." Jake made his choice the moment he took that card. He made it again when he wired $2 million without a single question. He wanted to be independent. Now he is. Jake stopped pacing. He stepped closer to his father, hands open in supplication. "Dad, I was wrong. I see that now. The greed blinded me. I have been jealous of everything you built. I hated feeling like the failure who always needed saving. But this has destroyed me. I lost everything. I lost you. I lost you. I lost you. I lost you. Please, tell me what I can do to make it right." His voice broke completely. The young man who had dreamed of luxury villas and private jets now stood trembling, stripped of every illusion. Regret flooded him like a tide, too late and too deep to change the past. Richard allowed a long silence to stretch between them. The ocean waves outside continued their indifferent rhythm against the shore. Inside the villa, the air felt thick with the end of something sacred. "You want to make it right?" Richard said at last. His tone remained even, almost gentle, yet it carried the finality of a closing door. "Then understand this. Blood does not give you the right to steal. Family is not an unlimited credit card. I spent my life building something for you, for us. Late nights, missed vacations, every sacrifice so you would never have to struggle the way I did. And you repaid me by taking in the dark, twice. The first time with the card. The second time with the deal I placed right in front of you." Jake's eyes widened. The words landed like a slow, deliberate blow. You knew? You set this up?" Richard did not deny it. He simply nodded once, the smallest movement. "Yes, I knew about the card the morning after. I could have confronted you then, yelled, demanded repayment. Instead, I gave you the rope. You tied it yourself." Emily gasped. "Richard, what are you saying? You planned this?" She rose from the chair, voice rising in disbelief. "Our son is in pieces and you orchestrated his ruin." Richard turned to her, his expression softening only slightly for the first time. "I did not ruin him, Emily. His greed did. I simply held up the mirror. $2 million. The exact amount that would hurt the most. Now he feels what I felt when I saw those charges. The betrayal. The emptiness. The realization that the person you trust most can reach in and take everything while you sleep." Jake staggered backward. The truth hit him harder than the financial loss. His father had not been the unsuspecting victim. He had been the architect. The regret that had begun as panic now twisted into something darker, a profound despair that hollowed him out. "You wanted me to lose everything," Jake said, voice barely above a whisper. "You wanted me to break." Richard met his son's eyes without flinching. I wanted you to learn what betrayal feels like from the inside. Blood ties are supposed to protect, not exploit. You broke them first. I simply made sure the break was complete. I was real. You make it half. You make it half. The room felt smaller, the luxurious furniture and ocean view windows now mocking the wreckage of their family. Emily stepped between them, tears streaming down her face. Stop this, both of you. We are still a family. We can get counseling. We can rebuild. But Jake shook his head slowly. The fight had drained out of him. He looked at his mother with hollow eyes. No, Mom. It is over. I stole from him. He destroyed me in return. There is no coming back from that. He turned to Richard one last time. I hate what I did. I hate myself for it. But I hate you more, for making me feel this small. This, alone. You were supposed to be my father, not my executioner. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Richard's face remained calm, but something deep in his eyes flickered, a brief shadow of the love that still existed beneath the calculated justice. He did not reply. There was nothing left to say. Jake walked toward the staircase, each step heavy. He paused at the bottom, back turned to his parents. I will pack my things. I will leave today. You will never have to see me again. Emily reached out, but her hand fell short. Jake, please. He did not stop. The sound of his footsteps faded upstairs, each one echoing like the closing of a chapter that could never be reopened. Emily turned to Richard, voice breaking. What have you done to our family? Richard walked to the window and stared out at the Pacific. The sun continued to shine, indifferent to the ruin below. I did what had to be done, he said quietly. Blood should mean something. When it stops meaning anything, the only honest thing left is to let it break completely. Inside the once perfect California villa, the Thompson family had finally come apart at the seams. Jake's belated regret filled the silence like smoke after a fire. The confrontation had been quiet, almost civilized, yet it had destroyed the last fragile threads of trust. Father and son stood on opposite sides of an unbridgeable chasm. Emily wept in the center, caught between the two men she loved most. And the morning, which had begun with a wire transfer, ended with the complete and irreversible shattering of blood ties that could never be mended. Jake appeared at the top of the stairs a short while later, carrying a single duffel bag. He did not look at either of them. He walked straight to the front door, opened it, and stepped into the bright California sunlight without a backward glance. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than any scream. Richard remained at the window. Emily sank back into the chair, sobbing quietly. The villa, once filled with forced smiles and family dinners, now held only the heavy silence of absolute loss. Revenge had been delivered. The $2 million were gone. And the family that neighbors had envied for years lay in pieces on the marble floor, never to be whole again. The front door of the Thompson villa closed with a soft but final click. Jake was gone. He had walked out into the bright California sunlight without a single glance backward. His duffel bag hung heavy over one shoulder. The sound of his footsteps on the gravel driveway faded quickly into the morning air. Inside the house, the silence felt absolute. It pressed down on the remaining two people like a heavy blanket. Richard stood motionless at the large picture window. His hands were clasped behind his back. The Pacific Ocean rolled in with its usual calm rhythm. Waves broke against the shore in steady patterns. They did not care about the human drama that had just unfolded. Emily sat on the edge of the couch. Her body shook with quiet sobs. Tears streamed down her cheeks without stopping. The perfect American family that neighbors had envied for so many years now lay in complete ruins. Richard turned slowly from the window. He looked at his wife with eyes that carried the full weight of everything he had done. The revenge had succeeded. The $2 million had vanished exactly as planned. Jake had felt the sharp sting of betrayal from the one person he should have trusted most. Yet in this quiet moment after the storm, Richard felt no sense of victory. Only a deep and aching emptiness settled in his chest. He had protected his own pride. He had delivered a lesson that words alone could never teach. But he had also severed the last fragile threads that once held their family together. Blood ties that should have been unbreakable had snapped under the pressure of greed and calculated justice. He walked over to Emily and sat beside her on the couch. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch was light and careful. "It is over now," he said in a voice that sounded tired and drained. Emily lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "How could you do this to our son?" she asked. Her words carried both pain and disbelief. Richard sighed deeply. He had asked himself the same question many times during the long hours before the wire transfer. "I did it because I had to, Emily. Jake reached into my life while I slept. He took my trust. He took my peace of mind. If I had simply forgiven him the first time, the greed would have grown stronger. It would have destroyed him slowly from the inside. I chose to cut it out before it could spread any further." They sat together in the living room for a long time. The morning light grew brighter through the windows. They talked in low and pained tones about the years they had spent raising Jake. They remembered the sacrifices Richard had made. Late nights at the office. Missed family vacations. Every choice aimed at giving their son a better life. They recalled the happy moments too. The laughter around the dinner table. The family trips where everything still felt possible. Those memories now felt distant and fragile, like photographs fading in the sun. Richard spoke about the morning he discovered the credit card charges. The pain had cut deeper than any business failure he had ever faced. It was not just money. It was the realization that his own flesh and blood could betray him so casually. The plan for revenge had formed in his mind not from hatred but from a desperate need to make Jake understand the true cost of his actions. In many American families, the same dark pattern repeats itself behind closed doors. On the surface, everything looks perfect. Beautiful homes, successful careers, smiling photos on social media. Yet beneath that polished exterior, greed often takes root. The American dream promises wealth and opportunity for everyone. It celebrates ambition and self-made success. But it can also breed a quiet hunger that turns family members against one another. Children grow up seeing money as the ultimate measure of worth. Parents work tirelessly to provide more and more. Sometimes they give too much and expect too little in return. Entitlement replaces gratitude. Resentment replaces love. Jake's story was not unique. It was a mirror of countless households across the country where blood ties slowly erode under the weight of unspoken jealousy and unchecked desire. Richard's revenge had been cold and precise. It had forced Jake to confront the emptiness of his own greed. Yet as Richard sat with Emily, he began to question the true price they had all paid. Revenge brings a form of justice. It can restore balance in the moment, but it does not heal the deeper wounds. Trust once shattered is nearly impossible to rebuild inside a family. The pain lingers long after the money is gone. It changes the way people look at one another. It leaves scars that no amount of time can fully erase. Richard wondered if he could have chosen forgiveness instead. He wondered if a different path might have saved their son without destroying the family completely. After all the calculation and all the planning, he now saw the limits of revenge. It taught a lesson. But it also left everyone involved broken in different ways. Emily wiped her tears and looked at her husband. Her voice was softer now. "We lost him today. Not just the money. We lost our son." Richard nodded slowly. He understood the truth in her words. The family that had once gathered for Sunday dinners with forced smiles and polite conversation would never sit together again in the same way. The betrayal had exposed the hidden cracks. The revenge had widened them into an unbridgeable chasm. In the end, both father and son had chosen their paths. Jake had chosen greed and secrecy. Richard had chosen justice and consequence. Neither path led back to the love they once shared. Blood should mean protection and loyalty. When it stops meaning those things, the only honest outcome is sometimes a complete break. After all that had happened, the Thompson villa stood quiet and still. The ocean continued its gentle rhythm outside. The sun climbed higher in the clear California sky. Life would go on for each of them separately. Jake would have to face the consequences of his choices alone. Richard and Emily would have to learn how to live with the choices they had made together. The story served as a stark reminder of the fragile nature of family bonds. Greed can corrupt even the strongest relationships. Betrayal from within cuts deeper than any wound from outside. And revenge, while satisfying in the moment, often leaves behind a hollow victory that no one truly wants to claim. Finally, the weight of the morning settled into a quiet acceptance. After all the drama and all the pain, a deeper truth remained. Human beings in families are capable of both great love and great destruction. The choice between trust and betrayal is made in small moments. The decision between forgiveness and revenge shapes everything that follows. In American homes where success is worshipped and money defines status, these choices become even more difficult. Yet the lesson is clear. True strength lies not in taking or in punishing but in preserving the bonds that matter most. When those bonds break, something irreplaceable is lost forever. And so the Thompson family story ends here, not with triumph or happy reunion, but with a solemn reflection on what happens when greed meets betrayal inside the walls of a home. It is a cautionary tale for every family that appears perfect from the outside. It reminds us that the scars of revenge run deep. They mark not only the victim but also the one who delivers the blow.